All right, thanks for coming. David asked if I would give a talk on biological agriculture. So I'm going to talk about that and what impacts it might have on you as fruit growers. I use a lot of biological agriculture on our farm. We grow fruit, vegetables, and coffee. And it's all pretty successful. We've been doing it for 15 years. Helps you use a lot less fertilizer. We have a much more diverse environment, so we have a lot less problems with insect outbreaks, and we have a much smaller problem with erosion. So like the hurricane that we just got, if we got a foot of rain, our farm is set up in a way that absorbs that rather than letting that run off, which is kind of important. So biological agriculture, some people would say it's organic agriculture, but USDA organic standards don't necessarily include or require some of the things that we use, which I think are really important. So I get a lot of time, this is about 4 acres, our farm, I get a lot of time working on our farm to think about things in the bigger picture, so I'll give you some information on that. So just a little bit about who we are. We is Janet, this is her dad's parents' property. We moved down to take care of them in their golden years. He used to grow the best sweet corn in the island. So we've been here since 2003. The name of the farm is Kupa'a Farm. It means to make firm. We've been organic since 2005, and we were certified organic a couple years ago. It's 4 acres of vegetables, taro, sweet potatoes, coffee, lilikoi, mango, pineapple, and a lot more. We survive by direct sales to customers, farmers markets, hippie food stores, although we don't deal with them too much because you get kind of scalped on the prices. And restaurants are some of our best outlets. We're an educational resource for Maui and visitors. We've had the farm apprentice program up at our place, and twice a year we do a sustainable agriculture class in the university, about 15 hours of contact time. And we believe in sustainable agriculture, which for us means growing food, fiber, and potentially fuel now without comprising the ability of future generations to do the same. So you have to use an approach which has very low toxicity. For example, you don't want to use something that has a big impact on honeybees, so chemicals that would affect honeybees and their ability to pollinate the crops that you're growing. And you want to have limited impact on things like groundwater, so you don't want to have a lot of leaching, say synthetic fertilizers or chemicals that some people use. And most importantly, sustainable agriculture means that you preserve and build soil so that future generations still have that soil. You're not letting it all run off. There's places in some of the HCNS lands that the NRCS guys have said there's been over 8 feet of soil loss that they can see through sequential air photos from the Central Valley. Okay, I used to be an earth scientist, so I studied geology and rocks. And the big thing right when I left geology, and I left it not because I didn't like it, but because someone, my in-laws said, hey, why don't you move down to Hawaii and farm? I said, well, why wouldn't you try that? So we tried that. But earth system science embraces chemistry, physics, biology, mathematics, applied sciences, in transcending disciplinary boundaries to treat the earth as an integrated system. So you're looking at air, water, life, biology, land, all as an integrated system. And that's great when you're trying to study earth history and geology. But it has a lot of impacts and lessons for us in the form of how we grow our food. So this is a book on permaculture by Bill Mollison, who passed away about 1.5 years ago. He's sort of the grandfather of permaculture. And he promotes the use of the system approach, which is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, a protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, of looking at plants and animals in all their functions rather than treating any area as a single product system. It's a really great way to see yourself as part of the bigger picture as how you're growing things. So it's essential to understand the local system where you're farming, whether it's Haiku, Lower Kula, Upper Kula, wherever, and view yourself as part of it, not the boss. So it's really important, I think, to ask yourself the question, am I the collaborator, am I the boss, or am I managing things? What's my role in this whole ecosystem, which is my farm? This goes by a lot of different names. Some people call it organic agriculture. That's had a bit of a corporate label and significance. Biologic agriculture is one that I like because you're really working with the biology. And I'll tell you right now, I'm a big believer in biotech, and I'll show you the kind of biotech that I use. It's the techniques that have been developed over hundreds of millions of years by biology in the evolution of our planet. It's not something that's been developed in a laboratory where a human has tried to intervene in a somewhat limited picture of how the earth works and make changes, presumably for the better. It's also called regenerative agriculture because we rebuild soil, which is a very important part of farming, eco-agriculture, and biodynamic agriculture. So you have to ask yourself, and I was just talking with Kimo Simpliciano before I came here. You know, his farm was burned to the ground, and we were talking about our connections and how our connections to food only really happen when we have these disasters. You know, and people posted pictures of all the, Safeway, there's no produce in Safeway, and everything's empty. And it's like, well, you come to us. We have a lot of the food you need. Support your local farmers. And so it depends upon your connection. So if you have an ego-driven view of the world, men, and this is where it comes from, men are at the top, right? So women are below, and everything goes down this pyramid, right? If you have more of a ecological perspective on the earth, then there is no tiered structure. No one's better than the other. We all have our jobs to do. We all function in concert. So essentially, biological agriculture works with this view of the world around us. So the bacteria and the fungus on my farm are no more important than I am in terms of the survival of that farm. So that, again, you ask yourself, am I the boss, the manager, the facilitator? So for me, I'm mostly the facilitator, providing the opportunity for the biology to do what it needs. I'll do a little bit of managing if, I prune my fruit trees and things like that, and we do weed management. Definitely not the boss. Okay, so humans' impact on the world is perhaps best demonstrated by this view of the world taken from space at night. This used to all be black, right? So this is all the lights that you see on our planet, and this is an indicator of our impact on the planetary environment. And one of the things that really emphasizes this is the changes in carbon dioxide. So this is about 800,000 years ago up to 0, which is the present. And then this is the concentrations of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And you see it's gone up and down over the last 800,000 years. All of this is from ice cores in places like Greenland and Antarctica, where you can look at trapped gas bubbles and reconstruct the ancient atmosphere. And everything from 1958 to here, up to the top, are measurements made in the atmosphere at Mauna Kea. So, which is pristine, and we can actually see the changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide. So this is it's rather dramatic in the same sense that light on our planet is somewhat dramatic. So there's ways that we can actually work as farmers to reverse this. Just to emphasize the same thing, this was 1979, the North Pole ice cap, and here it is in 2007. It won't be long before the Northwest Passage is a reality in terms of ships being able to move through there. From the perspective of agriculture, 17 to 32% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. That includes carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, that's given off when I use a synthetic fertilizer and I put it in the ground. Only 40% of the nitrogen that I think I'm buying in that bag actually has the potential to make it to the plant. A lot of it goes back into the air as nitrous oxide. Some of it washes out as water-soluble nitrate goes into the water table. And methane, 47% of total methane given off by humanity comes from agriculture. Those are all real important greenhouse gases. So if we change the way we do agriculture, we can change the way those greenhouse gases have an impact. So the solution to rising carbon dioxide and climate change is soil regeneration, carbon sequestration, and the byproduct that is fabulous, healthy food. And you can stop anytime if you have questions or something, right? So soil is perhaps one of our greatest resources. As Dave Montgomery says, he's a person who studies landforms, a scientist. The last article I ever edited for one of the geological societies came from Dave, and he says, the mother of all terrestrial life and every nation's most strategic resource is soil, yet we treat it like dirt. Business as usual is not an option when it comes to soil, food, and people. It's time for a greener revolution. So this could be a cut of soil over in haiku, where you actually have really rich organic material on the top. You have partially weathered basalt in here, Madame Pele, and then unweathered Madame Pele down here. And there's an organic rich horizon that's fairly typical, an A horizon, which is intermediate between lots of organic material and weathered rock, partially weathered rock, and then down here the mineral rich subsoil. So most of the biology that supports us and supports our planet and interfaces with the atmosphere is just this upper part. It's pretty thin skin when you think about it. And so we want to do what we can to nurture it, take care of it, preserve it, and if you can, build it. Another Dave's articles is Agriculture Eroding Civilization's Foundation. Rates of soil erosion are 10 to 100 times higher than the rate that soil is produced. So if I'm a farmer and I get a new piece of land and I can open it up and I go, this is fantastic, and a cone of storm comes along and takes away 1.5 inches of soil, that's about 3,000 years worth of soil lost in one storm. So globally, we're going to get to the point where soil is eroding faster than it's being produced. As Franklin Roosevelt said in the days when the U.S. Department of Agriculture was really helpful and focused on environmental issues, it's a nation that destroys its soil, destroys itself. And Will Rogers, who was a cowboy poet, said they're making more people every day, but they ain't making any more dirt. So you can change that on your farm. So the ideal composition of soil, and this is where we get into the what is the real engine for fertility, regardless of whether or not it's an orchard or a vegetable farm. Ideal soil, 45% mineral, 25% water, 25% air. That pore space is really key for keeping water and air in there. Lots of biology lives in that environment. And then there's 5% organic matter, and this is what really powers the fertility on your farm. That organic matter consists of living organisms, fresh organic residue, and decomposing organic material, and then eventually it will become non-reactive material in your soil, humus. Some people refer to this as the living, the dead, and the very dead. So living organisms, dead material, and then the humus would be the very dead. 5% is a small proportion of organic matter, but when you multiply it over the global acres of agricultural land, which is about 40% of the global land area, it becomes really significant for a lot of different reasons. But one, for example, if we're tilling all this material and running tractors over it, that organic matter gets oxidized by oxygen in the atmosphere, turns into carbon dioxide. You lose it in the soil, and you increase carbon dioxide. The alternative is if you use techniques that actually trap the organic matter and build it up in the soil, you're reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The thing that is the engine for this is called the soil food web. So, and I think about this a lot when you're driving around town or in your backyard and you look at this beautiful big tree, you have to imagine that there's an equal amount of biomass below ground level. And it's just as complex as what we see above ground. There's all different types of organisms living in there. We know very little about it so far. This term was coined, the soil food web, in the 1970s. It's a solar-powered system where you have plants above ground with an equal biomass of plant roots below ground. Both the above-ground organic matter and the roots provide waste material that supports bacteria and fungi and some nematodes that are root feeders. Personally, I have a problem with root-feeding nematodes. It's the scourge of tropical agriculture, root knot nematode. We have to go through a very disciplined way to manage them on our farm using crop rotation, otherwise you're done. But the bacteria provide food for single-celled organisms, protozoans, Some nematodes, these are microscopic worms, they'll eat bacteria. There's arthropods here, like the little roly-polies. Those are the chippers and shredders that you see in your the organic matter in your soil. And then eventually it gets up to birds and animals. Of course, this is a mainland view of the soil food web, so they don't have centipedes like we have in the mainland, and they don't include earthworms. Charles Darwin did research on earthworms and concluded that he estimated that there could be as many as 1.75 million earthworms per acre in healthy soil, and that collectively their weight might be greater than the cows that are grazing on the surface. Yes?
After you have a nematode problem with one crop, what do? Do you rip up the crop's roots and let it lay fallow for a year? What's the next few steps?
Okay, so the biggest problem with nematodes are in carrots, beets, spinach, some beans, eggplant. Some plants can carry on quite well even though they have nematode infestations. Beets, forget it. You only get one crack at it. But eggplants can survive pretty well. So what we'll do is we'll take out whatever crop that was after we've harvested it, the one that has nematodes. We'll remove any of the material that we can visually see that's infected, and there's big galls on the roots, and so you can remove those. And then we'll plant something that nematodes don't like. Could be something in the onion family, could be something in the brassica family. There are certain grasses that you can plant that the nematodes hate, and they'll go down as deep as they can to get away from that, and they'll kind of go to sleep. And then after you take that grass out and incorporate it, or after you harvest your broccoli family stuff, you can then go and put beets in there. So we do stuff where it'll be beets, arugula, carrots, we might do onions, we might do lettuce, and then we go back to the beets. And it's taken a little bit of using a hockey analog, stick handling, to come up with a recipe that kind of works, that doesn't require using any chemicals.
How about corn weevils and banana roots?
Oh yeah, that is a problem. We haven't really had to deal with that yet. Some of the bananas, when we do transplants, I see that there's knots and nodules on them, so they must be getting some sort of nematode problems. One of the things you would have to do is figure out a type of biofumigation, and you can do that by growing mustard, for example, and then incorporating that into the soil, and that'll drive away some of them. There are some extracts that you can get. You can make an extract from a Spanish needle. It's a very common weed that we get. You can soak the leaves and make a tea and apply that, and it has a compound, I don't remember the name of it, that basically paralyzes the nematodes, and they can't feed. And the root knot nematodes are not as mobile as, say, the bacteria-feeding ones, and their life cycle is longer. So they actually take the biggest hit from using like the Spanish needle tea.
Are corn weevils nematodes?
I don't think they're nematodes, but I mean I haven't seen corn weevils at all.
Yeah, they're working on their banana plants on part of our property. And they're slowly making themselves they're slowly moving down the row.
Yeah.
And seem to slow down, hopefully.
I don't know, you either have to find a parasite that will go after them, or figure out another way of, you'd have to use some type of systemic, and there's organic systemics. I'd have to do a little more research on that. Okay, so the soil food web is the engine for your farm in terms of fertility. And if you have it really active on your farm, you have decreased disease issues on your plants. You have decreased fertilizer bill because these guys generate the fertilizer. And I'll show you how they do that. So, next time you go to the beach, I always give this to the students I have in class. This is your homework. Go to the beach this weekend, pick out 12 sand grains and just hold them in your hand, and that'll give you an idea of the scale of this picture. So each of these is an individual sand grain. This is a plant root that comes down here. Here it has little root-like structures that are associated with fungus called mycelium. Here's a microarthropod in there. These shaded areas in here is the water. That's part of our 25% water in the soil. The clear areas are part of that 25% air. So, if you're doing agriculture with heavy equipment, you don't want to drive your equipment on wet soil because you compact a lot of this apartment spaces and you end up with a lower biological activity. So this is all happening in 12 sand grains. So how does this all work? Stoichiometry just means it's ratios of different elements. So in this particular case, we're looking at the ratio of carbon to nitrogen, two common elements in everything. Bacteria have a ratio of 5:1, fungi are 20:1, you and I are 30:1, typical green leaves are 30:1. Protozoans, single-celled animals, those are also 30:1. Nematodes are 100:1. Brown plant material is 150 to 200:1. Deciduous wood and like tropical wood shavings, we get wood shavings from our neighbor. It's going to be 300:1, lots of carbon. So what does this mean for fertility? So here's a picture of a nice little single-celled microorganism. This one's called Vorticella. It was living in some of the compost tea we made. It has these little whirly hairs on it that create a vortex that haul in bacteria inside the animal, and it digests those. Remember, this is all a single-celled organism. I always find it mystifying. So if I'm a protozoan like this, I need 30 atoms of carbon for each atom of nitrogen, right? I'm 30:1. So in order to get that, I need 6 bacteria, and they're 5:1. So if I eat my 6 bacteria, I get my 30 atoms of carbon, but now I've got too many atoms of nitrogen. So I get rid of the 5 atoms of nitrogen and release that as waste material. It goes into the soil in the form of ammonium, which is then transformed by microorganisms into nitrate, which is predominantly the plant available form of nitrogen. So everyone knows that animal manure is good for your farm and your plants, right? These guys produce manure too, and that's what we use. It's just, instead of being big cows, they're single-celled cows, so to speak. And so by having a very active soil food web and biology in your soil, you generate a lot of waste material from the microorganisms, and that's what feeds your soil, and that's what feeds your plants. So on our farm, we use about 20% of the recommended application rates of, say, nitrogen, etc., for fertility, because we have this very active soil food web. We're continually feeding that compost, organic matter, and that's what keeps our soil food web going year to year. It's pretty intensive food extraction that we do. So a healthy soil food web provides all kinds of ecosystem services that you can't buy. It provides plant nutrients, increases water retention, decreases soil erosion rates. It provides something called particle aggregation. I'll show you a picture of that. It glues those particles of soil together. And it improves something called the cation exchange capacity, which is kind of an idea of what your credit limit is. Soils with high cation exchange capacity can store a lot of the relevant atoms that your plants need in the soil, whereas soils with low cation exchange capacity don't have that much ability to hold those nutrients. So for example, I won't go into that detail. All right. And it builds soil organic matter, which is a form of carbon sequestration. So if you take 100 pounds of soil, that's 3 feet by 6 inches by a foot, with only 1 to 2% organic matter, it can hold about 35 to 45 pounds of water, which is equal to a half or an inch and a half of rainfall. If you increase the organic matter from 1 to 2 to 4 to 5, you can now hold 4 to 6 inches of rain in that same volume of soil. So by increasing the organic matter, you're increasing your water retention capacity. Someday, Maui County will actually pay farmers to improve their water retention capacity because we're increasing organic matter. Okay, here's some of our soil. Believe me, it did not used to be this way. Kenneth knows, he's farmed some of the same system series of soils. They're really clay rich. generally don't have a lot of texture and structure to them, but we've been able to build texture. We've formed aggregation, structure. There's mineral balance in it, which is something you can intentionally do by using a soil analysis to, say, improve calcium-magnesium ratios. You have to grow this. You can't go out to crop production services or Simplot and say, yeah, I need to buy some aggregate from my farm. They don't do that. So you have to do it by culturing it on your farm, and that's the culture part of agriculture. One of the things that we focus on in biological agriculture is the rhizosphere, and that is the area around the root that is affected by root secretions and associated soil biology. That's where your soil food web is really active. 5 to 21%, and some people have corrected me, they say it's actually up to 37 or 40% of what a plant produces by photosynthesis. It pumps down into its roots, where it comes as secretions from the roots that are basically saying to the microbes, come on, we got some good stuff here. You guys come here, we'll take care of you, you take care of me. It's a very nice symbiotic relationship. It's a 400 million year coevolutionary relationship, because plants first appeared on land about 400 million years ago. This is from the Conservation Research Institute. Each one of these little ticks up here is about a foot. And these are some perennial grasses from the prairies. So, they get up to 6-7 feet tall, and you can see how they're matched by root mass below ground. So it gives you an idea of that above as below. And everything that's produced by photosynthesis up here doesn't all stay up here. It goes down into this environment here.
The exudates basically sugars?
There's a lot of different ones. Some of them are sugars. There might be proteins. They're compounds that plants give off for communication with the microbial world. Okay, so the tools of biological agriculture, this is what we use on our farm. The first one is compost to build organic matter and feed the soil food web. So these are some nice buckets of compost. We produce all of our own compost. I'm sure Kenneth is going to help us get municipal compost going here on Maui. We have great potential. There's 27,000 tons of food waste that is thrown out each year, which if you compost that with existing wood chips and the leftovers of bagasse from HCNS, you would have enough compost to cover about 3,000 acres a year, which is pretty well covers all of the agricultural land, plus throw in some golf courses or whatever. We use biological nitrogen fixation. We use that through crop rotation and companion planting. I'll show you how that works. We use mycorrhizal inoculation, and this really helps a lot with tree growth. And we use, for vegetable production, limited tillage, and we don't use any synthetic chemicals, because if you think about what's down there, you want to take good care of them, because they're working with you on your behalf. Okay, so this is probably more than you want to know, but I just point out that the ability of, when I was talking to Karen, there's nitrogen fixation. These are all the plants that we use for nitrogen fixation. Okay, this is a Gliricidia, which is a tree that grows to about 20 feet here. You can cut it down each year for wood chips, and it'll grow back another 15 feet per year. This is pigeon pea, gondule, edible. It lives for 3 to 5 years, produces nitrogen in the ground. And then this littlest one in here, which is sleeping, because this is the time of day they go to sleep. This is Caliandra, and this is another nitrogen fixer that the flowers are very popular bee forage. So each of these plants produces nodules on the bottom, on its roots, that look like this. I'll show you this a little bit more in detail. And it's basically an enzyme, and enzymes are just folded proteins. Each breath that you and I take is about 72 or 74% nitrogen. It's the form of 2 nitrogen atoms held together. They're very difficult to break apart. That's why when you and I breathe in nitrogen, we breathe it back out. It doesn't interact with us at all. Sometime in Earth history, the availability of nitrogen became something of a competitive problem. so that bacteria said, there's got to be a way we can figure this out. So they ended up, there's over 1 million of these different enzymes and proteins, and they figured out one that is folded over and has the ability, this enzyme, to split these two nitrogen atoms apart. And we think from Earth system science, that was probably about 2.5 billion years ago. So this is tried and true over 2.5 billion years of Earth history. Humans still can't replicate this protein or this enzyme to do the same thing. I'll show you how we actually end up doing it. But microbes can do it quite easily. So we want to take advantage of that. So this is the way biological nitrogen fixation works. It uses a type of bacteria called a rhizobium, which rhizo is root and bio is life. So it's microbes that live on the roots of legumes. It could be beans, it could be each of these trees, it could be monkey pod trees, and the roots form these little colonies of bacteria. That is where the rhizobium. And it's a really cool thing that happens. There's the root hair that comes out. David was asking, what are these plants producing when they're giving off these exudates? One of them is a flavonoid. So the root hair comes out, gives off this flavonoid. The rhizobia are in the soil. In the rhizosphere, they detect that flavonoid. They say, I know what this flavonoid is. It's coming from a legume. So they release chemicals that cause a distortion of that root hair. It goes like that, and closes the bacteria. The bacteria then take up, they set up shop here in the plant root. They're enjoying all the effects, the benefits of photosynthesis, carbohydrates, sugars, etc. In the meantime, they have the ability to extract nitrogen from soil gas. Remember, 25% air? They extract nitrogen out of that air and fix it in a form that the plant can use, these guys here. And that's what legumes, monkey pods, koa trees, these guys use. So maybe there's a way we can put that to work on our farm. So this is one of the things that we do. Here's coffee, co-planted with Gliricidia, which is a nitrogen-fixing legume. Work that the French did showed that if you have here's a coffee tree in here, and here's a legume here. 25% of the nitrogen that the legume fixes out of the atmosphere actually makes its way to the coffee tree. So that's 25% less nitrogen you actually have to provide to your coffee plant. So that, that's your fertilizer bill is smaller. So you can take advantage of that. And then you get all the other benefits of having trees like that. These trees, they grow 15 feet a year. We make wood chips out of them. We use them for mulch. We use them for compost. You can see the pink flowers on here. It's fantastic bee forage. They flower from sort of late December through February. It's great food for carpenter bees, the big black carpenter bees, which one person said that those black carpenter bees aren't important pollinators, but if you've ever spent time looking at lilacoi, for example, they're always in there.
They're like beans.
They're like what?
Beans.
Yeah.
They love cold beans.
Yeah.
I don't see honeybees. I see.
Yeah, some of the flowers in the pea family are too difficult to get open. So this is one of the things you do when you're like farming and you see this beautiful set of fruit and flowers on pigeon peas. You go, wow. I wonder, like, is it bees that like the pigeon pea? And I remember looking at it, and the bees would go up, and they couldn't get the flowers apart to get the nectar. But solitary bees, called leafcutter bees, they're thinner, and they have different leverage ability, and they're able to get in there, and they get feet on the bottom of the petal, and then they push it open like that, and then they can get in and get all the nectar. And the big carpenter bees are like that, too. They're strong enough to get access into the flowers on a legume. So this is something that's really easy to do. You can just co-plant, and you can go after the fact. You can do this too. So every time we put in windbreaks, new stands of bananas, young, like our mango orchard is, every other tree is a nitrogen fixing tree. So it goes mango tree, and then we'll have a Gliricidia. Another mango tree could be a Caliandra, and we do that so that it's a more complete environment and less of a requirement for fertilizer. And it's free. So just a quick note on the alternative approach, and this is what you buy in a bag from, say, Simplot or Crop Production Services, and they'll say it's 10, 20, 20 or something like that, synthetic fertilizer. It was developed, originally the procedure was developed in 1918 by Fritz Haber, who was able to demonstrate that he could take nitrogen and using temperature and pressure, take nitrogen from the atmosphere and make ammonia, which is the precursor for making ammonium, and then etc. It was industrialized by Karl Bosch in Germany, and became a major part of the Second World War because it was synthetic ammonium that could be used ammonium nitrate, explosives, etc. So it's after the Second World War, all these facilities had the ability to make explosives, and now they're out of business.
So
So,
they used to make urea.
right,
All
so
the pineapple industry urea came from Germany.
yeah, so that was kind of the birth of chemical agriculture, is that taking all these former munitions factories, they could make chemicals. It's an amazing thing, and I don't begrudge these guys, except I don't really think that it's here for the long run. 1% of the world's energy supply is used for producing all of the world's fertilizers. So that's pretty efficient. It sustains 40% of the world population in terms of fertilizer use. But there's a downside of it. This is the Mississippi River Delta right here, the same delta seen right over here, Louisiana. There's some pretty serious side effects when your nitrogen is water soluble and it can run and follow the water table. This shows the incidence of events in which the oceanic water became depleted with oxygen, starting at 1910 and going to 2006. And you can see things are cruising along, and then as we started to use more and more fertilizer, more chemical fertilizer, the number of these events increased dramatically. So you get nitrogen runoff due to the solubility of the nitrogen. So in the Midwest, there's 87 million acres of corn. So every year, a certain percentage, a big percentage of that fertilizer that's put down heads down the Mississippi River, because it's only about 40% efficient at best, heads down the Mississippi River and prompts the growth of algae in the Gulf of Mexico. The algae dies, bacteria consume the algae, the bacteria consume oxygen. You get these huge areas of, it's called the dead zone. That's mappable each year, and that's what this red area is out here. So that's one of the side effects of using synthetic fertilizers. Okay, one of the other things you can do is mycorrhizal inoculation, and this really came about in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's using a fungus that is symbiotic on the roots of plants. So this is soil fungus. These are these nice little white patterns or white strands that you see. This is what they would look like if you could increase the magnification on them. All these little bumps here are calcium oxalate, so fungus and those white strands are fixing calcium in your soil, making it available to your plants because they're transferring it from the minerals into the biologic realm, and then it becomes plant available. And this is just some of my favorite guys on our farm. Because of the chemical uses and tillage techniques my father-in-law had used, there was never any fungus. But within about 3 years, things recovered, and we started to get these little, they're called bird's nest fungus, and they started to show up. So I imagine something like that is going to happen on HCNS land and pineapple land as well. Eventually the fungus will come in and start fixing stuff up. So this is the way mycorrhizae work. Don't worry about these two guys up here. It's a fungus that lives on the roots. It enhances drought tolerance and improves water storage. The fungus act like little vacuum cleaners going out looking for nutrients. And they may provide an avenue of plant communication between adjacent plants, kind of like a fiber optic network, and they might help fight off some of the soil-borne pathogens as well. So you can buy a mycorrhizal inoculant. Some of the stores carry them, and there's about, I think, 6 or 7 different species. Only 3 of them are allowed here, maybe even only 2, I'm not sure. The state keeps an eye on it. But you can buy this as a powder to inoculate your plants. If you have plants that you are already in the ground, then you can introduce this after the fact, either through drip irrigation or sprinkling it around the soil, covering it with mulch, and then letting it work its way down into the soil area. But this is an example of 2 potato plants grown in laboratory. This one was inoculated with mycorrhizae, this one was not. So dramatic difference in root mass and the whole performance of the plant. Again, this is the, yes?
You know, Bill Burgess used to strictly plant asparagus. Father-in-law planted that. He's quitting because he had no rotation. The fusarium came in and
Yeah,
he can no longer grow the asparagus.
yeah, yeah.
But does some of that, I mean, what would you do if your field is infested with fusarium?
You know, I would try using mycorrhizae. There's a couple of other biologic things. There's one is called, I forget if it's Sonata or Serenade. There's a couple different biological things that have bacteria which will go after fusarium.
Yeah, he just gave up.
Yeah, you know, we've had problems with fusarium on ginger as well, and that's almost an intractable problem. And you have to do a lot of rotation. So again, the idea that biotech has been tested over time. This is what a modern mycorrhizae looks like. It's this little shrub-like thing. This is the actual shape of that fungus. Could be in a plant that you found in your backyard yesterday. And then these are fossil ones here in a rock sample from Scotland, 410 million years old. The process that allowed plants living in seawater with everything that they needed to eat being dissolved in seawater to get onto the land, they had to develop some sort of relationship with an organism that knew how to extract minerals out of rock or soil. And that organism was fungus. So the movement from the oceans onto the landmass was in part accommodated by a hooeying up between the fungus and the future plants. So they've been working on this for 400 million years, so I kind of like this as a good example of biotech. The other thing that you can use, one of the other tools you can use is compost, which is using natural processes of decomposition to feed your soil and turn waste into a resource. Food waste produces 27% globally. It's the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas. If you said food waste is a country, there'd be China, the United States, and then food waste. So there's a lot of gas produced by food waste, and Maui County is right up there with the rest of the world. We paid, I think, $3 million in fines to the EPA for excess methane emissions from our landfill because we don't do anything about capturing that food waste. On our farm, we do. So all the restaurants we work with, we do farm to table, table to farm. So we catch what comes out of the restaurant, and we turn that into compost. So we go through between 40 and 50 tons of food waste a year and turn that into compost. It all goes back into our soil. You can also use biochar, which is another way of getting organic matter into your soil, organic matter that used to be carbon dioxide into your soil, and you get the benefits compost with that, providing you let it hang out in your compost pile and get inoculated with microbes first. So these are things you can use in your fruit orchards or in anything that you're doing. So for an example, this is what we do on our farm. We use cover crops. So there's Caitlin, she's a normal sized woman. That's a Sudan grass cover crop. We're just going to mow that down, incorporate it, and that's food for all the microorganisms in the soil. We use a lot of crop rotation, so you don't see much for monocrops. Always trying to keep one step ahead of soil-borne pathogens. We have lots of diversity. That's part and parcel of the farm. And we do permaculture plantings like this. Just 2 slides of showing an example. This is what our soil looked like in 2004. This is right after the first big Kona of the year in January 5th. We had 2.5-foot gullies that had come down the farm. Soil organic matter was only 1 to 2%. The erosion rate was 6 tons per acre per year. Soil pH was 5.5, and the soil was dominated by bacteria. It was almost impenetrable to roots. It's very difficult to get into. A couple of years later, 2006, Haleakala is up behind the house there. It's mostly covered. Soil pH is moderated out, 6.7. It's about perfect. Soil organic matter is almost 5%. It's a really good target. Erosion rate has dropped by a substantial amount. It's only 600 pounds per acre per year instead of 600 tons per acre per year. And we have a really diverse soil ecosystem. We have worms. There's worm tunnels in here. There's lots of 25% air, 25% water. So it's doable even if you were to do it at 35,000 acre scale. Might take a little longer, but so what can we do? Agriculture needs to embrace the biology of the soil and work with it. They work 7/24, so it's something good to work with. So you can use cover crops, you can use no-till or conservation tillage if you're a veg farmer, compost, microbial inoculation, crop rotation, minimal chemical disturbances. We have a lot of the technology that we need at hand. The Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania calculates that proper stewardship of agricultural lands could absorb current levels of human-produced carbon dioxide on an annual basis, so it would help draw down atmospheric carbon dioxide. I think the future looks really bright. There's a couple of great books. The Farm as Ecosystem, lots of great information in there. And then this is a class, a microbial interaction class at Utrecht University that's young people looking at innovative ways to harness the power of biology in agriculture in particular. So I'll close with a quote from Rodale. Climate change has provided an unparalleled opportunity to harness cutting-edge technologic understanding, human ingenuity, and the rich history of farmers working in tandem with the wisdom of natural systems to arrive at a stable climate by way of healing our land and ourselves. So let's get going. This is the same slide that I started with, the same farm. You can just see the whole farm is now expanded. So in a sense, that's all atmospheric carbon dioxide going down into the soil as our farm has grown up. So there you go. Biologic agriculture, it works. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm a witness to the erosion. My street in Kihei has a small creek in it, which is actually a big creek. And it floods every time there's a major Kona storm or Kula storm. And one year, I think about 2 years ago, it literally flooded for a couple days, and then when it was all over, the creek, as it narrows to go down into Kihei Road, is right near my house. There's a wall that protects us. But my neighbor's Filipino neighbor, he was over there, and I couldn't figure out why he kept climbing over the wall and coming back with buckets and a wheelbarrow. And I went over there. There's this beautiful, rich soil stacked at least 6 to 8 feet in the creek.
Yep.
And it all came from somewhere up there.
Yeah.
And I took my wheelbarrow over there and I used it in my yard. I mean, he got a lot of it, buckets, everything.
Can you return it to us when you guys?
Yeah, I know. That's probably actually, it's in my yard.
I've been eating for years to keep
It's in my lawn. It's in everywhere. It's in my trees. It's in my yard.
Well, nobody thought about putting like cement basins and stuff with the ranch lands, because I used to farm next to the Colorado Ranch. And we got this group, they're all into the reef, protecting the reef, but they've never invited the ranchers to the meeting, because they're causing the problem. So how do you solve it unless you get them involved? And there's ways to prevent soil loss or minimize it,
Yeah,
but they're not doing it.
I know. And this stuff looked like it was
Yeah.
the best, and it was really good.
Well,
and I'm
if
sure
you
it came
know
from
what they call
somebody's
the
place.
Kihei mud flats, that's
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
Yeah, I know, it's true.
Nice worms in
Anyway,
there.
just a witness to the 6 tons that can leave instantly.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just
And
in one rainstorm.
when you would see a lot of dust moving in the Central Valley when HCNS is switching from right after they burn a crop harvest, and then they bust it open for the next crop. And even Monsanto, when they were working near Ma'alaya, you would, from our place up in Cooley, you could see these clouds of dust coming out when they were using different pieces of equipment, and that all.
Yeah,
You know.
and that all blew into my house.
Yeah.
His farm is right next to the Waco Gulch. The Waco Gulch is where the ABC store,
The
what they
Suda
call
store.
the Suda store area.
Right.
That's the gulch that
That's-
he's next to.
That's a major one too. That floods a lot.
It's yeah, pretty.
It
big.
always floods.
Yeah.
That's like mine.
It's one of the bigger gulches.
I used to be the gully right by my house. I used to get cabbages and
Yeah.
oranges and everything coming inside. My soil is as rich as can be
Yeah.
in that area.
That's why the deer are visiting you.
Oh yeah, the deer visit me every night.
It's like Gerry said, my grandmother,
Drop their drops.
because over the years, if anything came down.
Just stayed.
Jerry, could you talk about the mineral profile of Maui? Everybody here is doing farming here, so all you must have the richest volcanic soil. And how's the profile at your farm? And do you have to add any mineral amendments? What kinds?
Yeah. So when a piece of Madame Pele starts on the journey to soil, lava, like what we see in Kilauea today, is being born at 900 degrees centigrade. The minerals, and these are crystals of olivine and feldspar and stuff like that, are in equilibrium with those temperatures at pressure or at a depth of 5 to 10 kilometers, something like that. So when you get them to the surface, all of a sudden they're in a state of disequilibrium. And so when they're exposed to weak carbonic acid from rainfall, they start to dissolve. And it's a transformation from minerals that are stable at higher temperatures and pressures in the crust to a new set of minerals that are stable at surface conditions. That transformation involves the decomposition and reconstitution of those minerals. So a mineral like olivine, beautiful green mineral, it decomposes, it loses its iron, it loses its magnesium, the silica is lost. Eventually it's going to end up being part of the soil as iron oxide and maybe a little bit of certain clay minerals, like kaolinite, that would have aluminum and silica in them. And the magnesium doesn't necessarily go anywhere, so it goes off with groundwater, it goes off with rainfall. So most of our soils, depending upon the age of the soil, are pretty depleted in mineral constituents, like elements, things like that. So the young soils over in Hana and Kipahulu and Keakea are in better shape in terms of having a complete menu of plant available and plant required minerals. But when you come around to even Kula, which is dry today, we weren't always dry. And maybe we're going to be wetter as the future goes on, who knows. Or if you get over to Haiku, where there's lots of rainfall and it's older volcanics, those soils are very leached. So you don't actually have a lot of the mineral constituents that you would need for intensive agriculture. On the flip side, when you take a plant like this, 96% of what's in that plant comes from the air: hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. 4% actually comes from the soil that's in there. So you don't need a lot of calcium, magnesium, etc. And the plants, in a rainforest type setting, will recycle a lot of that material. If you're going to be trying to do agriculture, you would want to take a soil sample and say, what elements am I actually missing in my soil profile, and what can I add? So we did that when we started farm, and we found that we were kind of low in calcium, we need some zinc, we need some boron, I think there was a couple of other things. So we had very benign mineral amendments, some of which are available locally, like there's crushed coral you can get from Kapolei over in Oahu. You used to be able to buy that in bags from Brewer, and it would be available almost on a on-demand basis. You'd have to say, hey, I'm going to come in and get a pallet, and they'd call the guys up in Oahu, and then a pallet would come over. That was great stuff. So you could add that to your soil. You're looking at 10 years before that becomes depleted. So things like that, when you balance your soils for mineral components, it has a long echo in terms of having nutritional value for your plants.
Do you continually add mineral amendments each year?
We look at, we get soil analyses done every 2 years, and that gives us an idea of what we're deficient in, or maybe sometimes we have excesses. We have a funny problem with potassium excess. It seems to be a characteristic of Kula soils, and the academics will argue about that. It doesn't really matter to me what the source of it is. Problem is there's too much potassium, and the plants get a little confused in terms of potassium, magnesium, which one of these I take up. So we get regular soil analyses and then make the amendments as required. But each year we've had to apply less and less of those amendments as we get closer to mineral balancing.
How about the trace mineral content?
Yeah, that even takes less application. So the trace minerals that are really important, for example, boron gives you really good fruit set. You need about 2 pounds, you need 2 parts per million of boron per acre, which is about 4 pounds, I think, something like that. And you can get it in like borax that you buy at Long's Drugs. So you don't need that much. Once you apply it, you know, it lasts a long time. The same thing with copper. A lot of these elements don't actually leave your farm. You know, when you harvest a bunch of lychee, percentage-wise, you're not taking out significant amounts of copper, for example, or zinc or something like that. It's mostly an element that is used within the plant, almost like an anvil for certain reactions the plant requires. Like maybe it needs a couple of extra electrons from the zinc, or maybe the zinc accepts a couple of the electrons from it, so the burn rate, so to speak, for the zinc, once you get it up to the levels that the soil requires and the plants require, it'll stay there for quite a while.
You know, the Korean nature farming is one of the nutrients they was seawater
Yes,
diluted, right?
right?
And they say they have all the nutrients.
It does.
Does that work?
Well, we use it. It's about a ratio of 7 to 1. So 1 part seawater and 7 parts fresh water is the dilution that you would use. And we make compost tea. We do 250 gallons at a time. We'll add about 6 gallons of seawater. The problem with seawater is that you do get all those other elements in there, but you get more sodium than you really want, which can have a short-term negative impact. But sodium is one of the elements that moves fairly quickly with irrigation water or rainwater.
Because I think they were saying it was like 30 to 1 or something like that. Wasn't it Korean nature farming?
Yeah, we have used it before.
It was recommended to HNS to use seawater mixed with fresh water.
Well, it depends upon what their soils are like.
Yeah,
You know?
that was the recommendation.
Yeah, I think I really like some of the aspects of Korean natural farming, but some of the aspects are that they don't look at mineral balance in soils, and they don't really promote using soil analyses to give you a baseline to compare where you're going. It's just like, do this and everything will be fine. And as one guy I talked to who's a soil consultant, he said, this was developed in Korea at a time when you had these Korean farmers that didn't have access to a lot of modern fertilizers and stuff like that. So it's better than nothing, but we might be a little bit farther along than that now. I know some people have had a lot of success with it. Some people have given up on it.
What's your source for the seawater? Obviously the ocean, but
Yeah.
how do you get it to your farm?
I just go and fill up a couple of buckets. That's it. It's probably got some, what do you call it, sunscreen in it and stuff like that.
That's some plastic.
We don't really have a lot of options. You can't go offshore and get some nice clean water. I mean, you could, but I don't have a boat. So we do that for some of the, I'm sure you get some trace elements. Another thing that you can use that's a local product is rock powder. So every quarry here is crushing up blue rock. And every quarry produces a powder.
Rock fine.
Yeah, and you used to be able to just say, I want rock powder, and they bring that, you could get, Colossa Trucking to bring it up, and it costs like $15 a ton, the shipping, the trucking is more expensive.
Yeah.
But it would have broken motors and overs, because it's all the stuff that falls off the conveyor, and they just scoop that and put that in the truck. So if you get 4F, which is 1/4 inch and finer, so you have some 1/4 inch stuff plus the fine powder. So what we do is we take that and we will do a layer of that in our compost, and then the microbes start to break down the rock powder, and so that all the nutrients, both the micronutrients and some of the metals that are in the rock powder, then they enter into the biologic realm in the compost. And the other thing that we do is that we'll take the rock powder, we'll put it in a paint strainer, and then put in 5 gallons of water, and you just kind of slosh it in there for a while. And then what stays in the paint strainer, you can use that in your compost. But now you've got this milky gray water, and we'll pour that into our compost tea brewer. And that's all the stuff that's real small, like 10 millionths of a meter, 10 microns, pretty small. It has a greater chance that microbes will be able to start to digest that and transfer those nutrients from the inorganic realm to the organic realm. So, and you don't have to pay for anything like that. I mean, you do, but you're not buying it in a bag that comes from Wyoming that's got like tumbleweed seeds in it or something like that.
How many quarries here are generating rock dust or rock powder?
The two of them, the HC&D and Hawaiian Cement, right?
Of course, you can buy glacial dust.
Actually, you know what? That's really interesting that Kenneth brings that up, because when I teach class, there's something called azomite, which stands for A to Z of minerals. And it's a product that's mined in Utah or Nevada or somewhere like that. And it's touted as having all these different minerals. And I go, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Like 95 or so, huh?
Yeah. And it's expensive, and it comes from somewhere else. So one of the students said, well, what's the difference between rock powder that's from here and azomite? I said, okay, well, I'll find out. It's a great question. So you can find out, the U.S. Geological Survey has analyzed a lot of our lavas, and you can compare the elemental compositions of azomite versus rock powder, and it turns out our rock powders are better than azomite.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, because we have more magnesium, we have less potassium, more calcium, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually a better product.
That's something to know.
Oh, yeah.
So like a 50-pound bag of azomite at a Hula Hardware is like $50 or something?
Yeah.
Crazy?
Yeah, so
Buy the rock dust.
yeah, the rock dust is less. I talked to the rock dust guys about bagging it. They weren't really interested in that.
So what do they do with it?
It just-
how do you get it?
It's a waste, really. They have
Can you shovel in a load
Yeah,
in
No,
it?
there's
you
some-
gotta go dump truckload.
Yeah.
What's that? Dump truckloads. So if you buy a truckload, you may have to share it with somebody. You don't have
Yeah,
to hold
but the
it.
smallest amount you can get is like an F550, so that's a Ford F550. I think they can
Yeah,
carry what?
because of the scoop of the.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
the gross vehicle weight restrictions are
Yeah.
allowed to do that. So,
Somewhat-
but that's a
Yeah.
So that's like 10 tons or something?
no, it's less than that. It's
5?
like 4 or 5 tons, something
Okay.
like that. So you could like hooey up with some friends. You get a pile, and then a bunch of people show up, and then the pile's gone. Everyone has their rock powder.
Somebody from Oahu, he wrote about it in the Farm Bureau, their newsletter. He puts something like 4 tons per acre, just covers the field.
Sure.
He was growing like 3 years of corn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because you're
And it
basically
lasts a long time, like
Yeah.
you say.
you're resetting your soil to a degree. Like you're reintroducing all the elements that were formerly in your soil, the calcium, the magnesium,
In the rock.
that has been leached out. What you're not reintroducing are some of the particular, how would I say it? So there's minerals and there's minerals. Like there's 12 different minerals in Wonder Bread, right? But that's not the same as the minerals that's in a piece of lava that you pick up. So minerals in a piece of lava are internally ordered minerals made of different elements. The 12 minerals in Wonder Bread are 12 elements. So when you reintroduce minerals with rock powder into your soil, you're reintroducing elements, but you're also reintroducing some of those three-dimensionally ordered minerals, whether it's feldspar, olivine, or whatever. And the great thing that happens in our young soils is the minerals that are present in our young soils have a fantastic exchange capacity for cations, so they can hold stuff on. Yeah, so you don't get that just by adding the rock powder, but you do get the actual elemental kick out of it.
It seemed to work for you.
Yeah.
There's an organization that's been around for a long time, Joanna Campy, and my friend Don Weaver contributes, Remineralize the Earth. They had a great magazine also online, it's at remineralize.org.
Uh-huh.
All the studies there, and great resource.
Yeah, remineralize the earth. I'll try to remember that.
You know, the synthetic fertilizer, the source of phosphorus, isn't that all mine? And are we exhausting the...
Well, that's a
Well, yeah.
really good question. So yes, phosphorus is actually one of the more important life-limiting elements on the world, right? So productivity in the ocean is phosphorus limited.
Oh,
And so to get phosphorus in our soil, like our soils have a lot of phosphorus in it, but most of it's held with iron oxide.
Yeah.
So our red soils have great phosphorus. You have to have microorganisms that know how to kick that iron out, because they're going to use some of the oxygen from that iron oxide. The byproduct of that is that the phosphorus becomes biologically available. But what conventional agriculture does is they actually mine products that have a phosphate mineral in it. And it has the name of apatite or monazite, lots of different names.
well,
They dissolve it and then reconstitute it into a water-soluble form. So if you add conventional phosphorus, so that's the second number on your bag of fertilizer, the NPK, when you add that, it gets dissolved. Your plants get some of it. Iron in the soil probably takes some, and some escapes from the system and can really cause problems in, if it makes it into offshore areas in terms of.
because the fertilizer company, BEI, was originally Pacific Fertilizer and Chemical. And the symbol on the bag was this bird. So they called the fertilizer Gaviola, which is
Yeah.
seabird.
Mhm.
And they used to mine that from these islands where all these birds were, and then they pooped, and they had, the island was phosphate.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
they
there-
got mined out of it.
And that is one of the, there's a finite amount of phosphate on the earth.
Yeah.
Morocco currently has something like 40% of the world's reserves. Monsanto had bought phosphate mines in Wyoming and Idaho, because they're like, if we're going to be phosphate challenged in
Yeah.
the future, we might as well buy some stuff now, and then we have our finger on the pulse for that.
Oh.
But there will be a point where
Yeah.
phosphate will be limiting in a conventional agricultural sense. But I think if, from a biological farming sense, if you have mineral balance, or if you have like our Hawaiian soils where the phosphorus doesn't dissolve very easily. So if you take Madame Pele's lava and the phosphorus gets released, it gets grabbed up right away by the iron oxides. They're, and held. So if you have biology that can separate the two, then the phosphate becomes available to your plants. So we've added a little bit of phosphate to our soil, but not very much.
Well, I was conventional farmer, so any soil sample always showed very high.
Yeah, but
Because
then,
it's dissolved slowly.
yeah,
It's always in the soil.
yeah.
What about bat guano and the seagull droppings? How's that compare to the phosphate?
I think it's got it's got some nitrogen, it's got phosphate, and then it also has a little bit of potassium in it too. I'm sure it's not a bad product per se to use. I mean, it's a finite resource, unless you have, bats in your backyard. You can get it's pretty similar things with chicken poop. Yeah.
That's what Craig Nier uses. He's got huge bags of chicken manure. He's walking by his house. Just chicken manure.
Yeah, you used to be able to get it from the guys on Makani, right?
Well, yeah, I worked there, so I knew. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't know, like Chuck Warner used to just throw it off his truck but it wasn't composted.
Yeah, if you don't put it down real
You're supposed
thick.
to compost it, cause it's hot.
Yeah, but if you put it down pretty thin.
But he's in a wet area.
Yeah.
So it made a difference.
Yeah.
But you're not supposed to put fresh manure.
Generally speaking, not. Yeah.
Tell people about your website, we'll wrap it up.
Our website,
How do they get there?
kupa'afarms.org.
And you can touch farm tours, trainings.
We do farm tours. We have a class coming up in UHMC on sustainable agriculture. I think it's in October or November. We also post a lot of stuff on Instagram too, if any of you have Instagram accounts. We're just at Kupa'a Farms. It's instructional, frivolous, all at the same time. Giant mangoes, it's whatever. Yeah. Yeah, we grow these R2, T2 mangoes. They're about 4 to 5 pounds.
Whoa.
Whoa,
They're not my favorite mango in terms of flavor,
yeah,
but
but they're big.
they're big, so they're eye-catching, low fiber.
What's it like?
It's a little bit more of a flowery citrus type of flavor to it compared to like a Raposa or a Hayden,
Yeah.
but you can't beat them for pumping out we got hundreds of pounds of mangoes off those trees this year.
Would that one be good for people to pickle? Do a pickled mango?
Yeah, you could. The best one I've seen on the island for the pickled mango is the Kit, K-E-I-T-T. It's a Florida bred mango. They get to like 6 or 7 pounds.
Yeah.
They're really difficult to ripen properly.
Oh.
So they're perfect for green pickled
Yeah.
mango.
How do you get that one? Where do you get that one from? The plant?
Plant at Hawaii carries them. Yeah, they'll have grafted versions of those. We've grown them, and it's just real frustrating. They're just heavy fruit set, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then they'll split on the bottom, and you open them up, and they're partially ripe, but it's not a very satisfying mango. So if you picked them when they're big and green, you'd be off to the races.
Pickle,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
I don't know. Still like full common mango.
We grow Raposas. It's more of a higher elevation mango. They totally charge. They're really good. And they come in out of season. We had a first flush in late July, and we have some that are going to be ready probably in 2 weeks. And everyone else's mangoes are done.
Mine are done.
Yeah.
Country normally used to be around the fair.
Oh, okay.
Or Haiti.
Yeah.
That was the season.
But you have mangoes
but
growing
the rain has changed everything, because it rains like different, it's a little different now. Compared, it used to be seasonal rain.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get off-season rain, it changes everything.
Yeah, these last few summers have been a challenge for us.
Yeah, it's like
Vegetable
throws the
production.
cycle off.
Yeah.
So
And the coffee trees, we've had 4 sets of flowers on the coffee trees this year, spread out over 2.5 months. So we're going to be picking from January until probably May or April, something like that. It's crazy.
And you're at the Kula Farmers Market every Wednesday?
Yep, Wednesday morning, 8 to 12.
Oh, so what do you sell there?
Whatever we have this year, what do we take this week?
you got coffee.
We got coffee, lilac jam, bananas, papayas. We have mangoes, we take those. We have organic onions, leeks, green onions, lettuce sometimes.
Thank you, Jerry, it's fantastic.
Okay, great, thank you.